Welcome, you're with Ian.
And Mike.
And this is The Lubber's Hole, the podcast that explores the entire series of naval novels by Patrick O'Brian.
If you're joining us having already enjoyed episodes 1 and 2, thanks for coming back. It's great to have you with us again.
And if you're picking it up for the first time, welcome aboard. We hope that you're going to feel at home right away. So, Mike, let's just think where we are in the series. We got finished last time with Master and Commander, right? Just paint me a picture of where we've got to in the story so far of Jack, Aubrey, and Stephen Maturin.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ian, what we did in Master and Commander, we got a lot of time on shore early on with Jack, Aubrey, the Master and Commander, and Stephen Maturin, his physician friend, meeting one another. We watched their fortunes rise and fall. And we followed a lot of action, but we also followed a lot of character development and a lot of story. And where did we leave our heroes?
We got to the point where Jack had been acquitted at his court-martial for having had his commander Sophie captured by the French. So Jack and Stephen are free but temporarily shipless, I guess, in the Mediterranean, in Gibraltar. And that was where we left them, presumably ready to head home. And that's where the action picks up, I think, at the beginning of Post Captain.
Yeah, and both of them, I guess, presuming their pockets to be, especially Jack's pockets, to be full of money from all the prizes that he's taken as his now Lucky Jack Aubrey, as everybody calls him.
Right, and having taken that big series of little coasting cargo vessels along the coast of Spain, he'd taken this big, menacing French frigate, the Cacafuego, and I think was pretty sure that was him set financially for a good while. Him and the rest of the crew, including Stephen Maturin, all jangling coins, literally and figuratively, in their pockets.
So I understand, as an Englishman, that thinking about the nemesis, the English Navy, it would be the French frigate Cacafuego. But remind me again, was the Cacafuego French?
This is Ian from the future. My good friend Mike's offering me the chance to correct my dumbass mistake, calling the Cacafuego a French frigate, and I'm going to completely tread all over it. Back to the show. The Cacafuego was Spanish, and the story has it that because the Sophie had been preying particularly on Spanish traffic going along the coast between kind of Barcelona and Toulon, that Spanish merchants had commissioned the fitting out and crewing of this vessel, the Cacafuego, to go out and basically, on behalf of the Spanish merchants, see if they could take or at least see off or deter the Sophie that was causing so much trouble in proportion to her diminutive size. But I've got a question for you, Mike. Lots of people said that Master and Commander was written as kind of a one-off, you might say like the pilot of a TV series, and that turning to pick up and write Post Captain was the moment where Patrick O'Brian began to plot a sort of genuinely multi-novel arc, and that it was therefore the beginning of something new. What do you think about that idea?
Well, it's interesting. There is a bit of this introduction of Aubrey and Maturin, and we've got Captain Hart and Molly Hart, but I can't imagine a one-off novel ending with this captain busting his head as he hears the sentence read out as his own court-martial, and that's it. We have that beautiful thing that you talked about with his sword being returned and how his honor is such that it has always been returned by enemy and by his colleagues alike. But I just can't imagine that if he did not have something else in mind, he would have ended it quite on that note.
Yeah, I'm with you as well. I mean, every writer of a successful TV pilot writes a bit of a cliffhanger at the end, but I think it's bigger than that, isn't it? He clearly set these characters up with developments in mind, and with particularly, there were rich veins of characterization and humor and relationships ashore that I think he was playing, as they might say in America, he was playing some pretty long ball, even when he wrote Master and Commander.
No doubt about it.
Overall, Mike, big picture time, how did you enjoy Post Captain compared to Master and Commander?
Well, it's interesting because I almost felt like, I mean, when I read Master and Commander again, I thought, gosh, I remember why I love Patrick O'Brien so much. I remember why I love Aubrey and Maturin and the relationship. I remember why I love the series so much. And then I reread Post Captain, went, oh my gosh, there's so much more. So here it is, everything
Yeah.
promised and I think delivered in Master Commander, but delivered maybe 10x in Post Captain.
Right. Oh wow, that's going pretty high. I've got to say too, if you'd asked me before we sat down to start these podcasts, which is my favorite, I would have said Post Captain.
Nice.
But I think that I'm digging so deep as we do the reread that I think I might be appraising some of their later books as well. But anyhow, Post Captain for me, it's longer than Master and Commander, and I think we're in for a really big kind of meaty story. Interestingly, one of the great things that we've started to see on the podcast is we get some feedback from our listeners. One of our friends, Pete, got in touch to say that he was glad that we're not racing through kind of a book at a time, a book at an episode. Partly, he said to me that he's got 2 that he's already planning to read that he's holding in reserve for holidays in the future. So, A, thanks for the comment, Pete, and B, we're going to try and avoid critical spoilers for you for later on. And rest assured, Post Captain's a meaty story, so I think we're going to take our time over this one.
So, Pete, without giving away any of these spoilers going ahead, I wanted to dig back for just a second, Ian, to Master and Commander and say that I not only listened to it, which is kind of my preferred way of doing it, but I went back and reread it as well. And one of the things that came up for me is it's great to listen to, it's great to read, and it's wonderful to do both because I realized that I missed a number of things in Master and Commander by only listening. One of which was what I thought was Patrick O'Brien's take on the banking system. He's in a scene, in a scene there in Master and Commander. He's sort of taken the midshipmen to task, and he's told them, when's the last time you wrote your families? I need you to remind your parents that my bankers are whores. And I thought, wow, that's quite the thing to say, And he shouted it twice, and he's kind of dictating to them on the deck of the ship. But when I read the book, it was like it was HOARES with a capital H, and I thought, what does that mean? So I looked it up and realized this is the oldest private banking establishment in England. All my bankers are whores.
No,
I think it's just for me another one of Patrick O'Brien's wonderful jokes. So now I've got to do Post Captain both ways and see what else I missed.
Excellent. Well, that's an interesting thing that we should think about in more depth. The pleasure of going through any favorite book series, but these books in particular, as written words on the page, either on the paper or on a Kindle, versus the pleasure of hearing them being characterized by a reader. So if you're out there in listener land and you've got a point of view, do you like the Kindle? Do you like turning the pages? Do you value that kind of back and forth? Or are you one of us who likes the audiobook experience where you can let it wash over and enjoy the kind of the vocal characterizations and the storytelling skill of the narrator? Tell us what you like. Tell us why you like it. And maybe we can explore that some more as we go through some more of these podcasts.
That would be neat. Ian, for the folks who are sort of saying, so where are we as we start back here in Post Captain? You just did a really nice job wrapping up the end of Master and Commander, but where are we in time? Where are we in history? What's going on?
Good question. So I'm going to make a spoiler for Chapter 1, and I'm going to say that the key action of Chapter 1 is that taking a ride in a ship home in around March 1802, the big discovery for Stephen and Jack is that the war's over. This particular bout of the Napoleonic Revolutionary Wars is over. The Peace of Amiens has been signed. The Peace of Amiens, as all us history nerds are going to know, was the 25th of March, 1802. So that kind of raises a bit of a question. If you also know your naval history, you know that they were in and around Gibraltar for the Second Battle of Algeciras, which was in the real world in July 1801. I wonder what they were doing ashore for 8 or 9 months between the court-martial at the end of Battle of Algeciras and the Peace of Amiens being signed in 1802. But I think we can forgive O'Brien for a month or two here and there, given how hard he has to work to step around the realities of history later on. I think he does okay. But yeah, this is a fiction. The O'Brien's universe in some places going to have a very different timeline from the real one. I think he mentioned in one of his books in one of the introductions that he had to use the year 1812 many times over.
That's right.
So here's where they are. Maturin and Aubrey on the way home. Peace has broken out. And we get this opening episode of them taking lodgings in a nice country house. They get to be young bachelor squires. And Mike, this just struck me as like we've landed in the opening chapter of a light-hearted version of a Jane Austen novel.
Well, it's so true. I mean, you've got all these men sort of keeping house, all these sailors together, but the real action that starts up here isn't just in Stephen and Jack's house. We go down the lane a bit. We're welcomed to a house there, and in the opening passages, it's kind of like we are absolutely in a Jane Austen novel here. So what we're brought into direct contact with the female world, although as I understand it, Jane Austen never wrote direct dialogue between men alone speaking together because she said, I never experienced that, so I wouldn't do that. So Patrick O'Brien sort of dares to tread where Jane Austen hasn't and takes us right into this bourgeois, petulant, anxious, privileged, shrewish kind of romantic, marriage-obsessed female world of the day with Mrs. Williams and all of her daughters and their cousin Diana. And we're introduced to three really colorful and very different female lead characters, Mrs. Williams, Sophie, and Diana. And O'Brien uses their point of view to show us some of the early days and weeks of Jack Aubrey and Stephen's lives of shore. We even get an admiral, a 19th century comedy surname that is going to give
Admiral
us...
Haddock, right?
Yeah, Admiral Haddock. So we're going to get this seagoing admiral with a name like that, having a little fun, who's kind of lives locally and can give the girls a little background on their two new neighbors.
Right, and it's not entirely complimentary. He passes on very, very indirectly the fact that Jack Aubrey's got a bit of a reputation for being a bit of a rake, and that Stephen Maturin's parentage is a bit uncertain. But once they're established as callable, clubbable, visitable members of the middle class, there's excitement, and the females are thinking, well, there are potential husbands here, and there's a social life that we might be able to delve into. We might get to talk later on about kind of the coverage of the female characters generally, because having written about females a little bit in passing in the first book, and certainly the one major female character in the first book, Molly Hart, Jack's mistress, is portrayed as beautiful, but also a manipulator of Jack and of other men. Portrayed in juxtaposition with the description of a praying mantis, eating the head off of her mate. We've got actual, more grounded, more real, more kind of interesting female characters, I think. I've got no idea what anybody would say if they analysed the gender politics of this writing. But for me, we've got women doing, even though they're doing kind of Jane Austen era, striving for romance and marriage and financial independence, they're doing it in nuanced and different ways. And I'm really happy that we've got some proper female characters to talk about in amongst all the kind of testosterone that was around at the end of Master and Commander.
Too true. And some very independent female characters, and characters who are going to have their own way, although do it in a way that, some more against prevailing norms in the system and others within it, but still independent and headstrong. And it was really, I enjoyed reading that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think headstrong is probably the word that you get in the dictionary when you look up Mrs. Williams. She's a real force of nature, the mother of Sophie. So we've got men in a rented squire's country house. We've got women in the neighborhood who are interested in bringing them into the social circle. We've got another species that plays a part in the storytelling earlier on. That's horses. So, Mike, you've got a point of view about horses. What was the first time that we met horses as part of the life of these characters? I can't remember.
Well, I think it's in that, one of the early fox hunts that Jack, even when Jack was looking at renting a place, was saying, here's a great place up in Sussex, and, there'll be some great fox hunting there. Oh, I'd love to have myself a hunter. and he's thinking about the horse he can have, and to go fox hunting out there. And interestingly, in this first scene, so we've got one of the women who rides in, and is there's a great description of her and her character and how she turns all the heads, particularly the way she is
Right.
with her horse and on her horse. And we've got Stephen Maturin, who's, as I recall, is riding an ass, and you know, it's just so, to me, I can see Captain Aubrey on this huge hunter horse, and Stephen kind of almost in a lounge chair of a donkey there, being about his natural history business. And from there, we've just got all kinds of horse examples, as well as this horse's stream of consciousness scene.
Oh yeah, we go inside the mind of the horse. That was funny.
The horse is saying, he's thinking about Jack up there, too heavy, sits too far forward, and when we go over a fence, I've carried him far enough for one day. I shall have him off presently. See if I don't. Oh, a mare! I smell a mare! A mare! Oh! And so, we mentioned last time about Patrick O'Brien's penchant for bringing minor characters into play and getting a little depth here. Now, Diana sitting her horse with the unconscious grace of a midshipman at the tiller at a lively sea. And this horse, in the case of the ladies, has been a bribe from Mrs. Williams to say, my daughter Sophie, I think, would be a great match for Captain Aubrey, and I want you to leave the captain alone, Diana. Here's a horse for you. Go play with the horse.
So we're getting the horses used as a way of signaling the kind of intentions and the status of the characters, and we're getting the horses playing a role in, disturbing or undercutting the action of the story as well. I think it's great. Do you think he's got an authentic take on the mentality of a male hunter horse? Do you think that's from what from your own personal experience of horses, Mike? I think he's onto something there.
Having watched the tale of more than one horse as I went down over the back, I think he had a great take on that horse.
Brilliant.
And sure enough, I don't think it was. I think it was just later in the chapter. Jack cleared a fence, lost his balance just a little bit, and the horse said, "Yeah, that's it." Shifted just a little bit, and then drug him along in the stirrup.
So we've got this kind of like we said, sort of micro Jane Austen world where these two naval action hero types have landed in this world where they're, to be honest, they're a bit out of place, right? Things are unfamiliar. They're finding their way. The manners and the kind of mores of the local womenfolk are a bit of a mystery. Like the wine's not great at dinner. They've got no notion of how much pudding to serve, but
Right.
they're quite happy to go along because the female company is attractive. And it's funny, we don't get the flirtation played out at great length the way that you might in a sort of a more traditional romantic novel. So we pretty much, in a paragraph or two, we get that Mrs. Williams has decided that Jack is the one for Sophie, and Sophie is keen on Jack as well, and she goes to the library and educates herself.
Well, it is interesting. So you've got, Mrs. Williams has asked Diana to clear the field. Sophie, as you say, has gone to the Admiral's library to learn about all these nautical terms and to make herself a little more interesting, only to find out that Diana was there before her. And Diana taunts her a
Right.
little bit as she sees Sophie on the way to the library saying, "Hello there, shipmate."
Oh yeah, she's kind of taking a bit of a rise out of Sophie.
Yeah.
And well, then we quickly get into this. There's this kind of easy bantering conversation between Stephen Maturin and Diana Villiers. And I remember as I read it, thinking, okay, things are going to fall into place. Kind of beautiful, gentle, kind, sympathetic Sophie is going to be the one for blustering hero Jack Aubrey, and kind of quirky, whip smart, independently brainy Diana is going to be the one for kind of, independent philosopher-minded Stephen Maturin, and they have these quite bantering, quite candid conversations, and it's funny. But I still get the sense that we're meant to pick up that Diana's really not going to be that faithful, and for all she likes the banter with Stephen, she's still going to have the capacity to do him some emotional damage.
Yeah, and it's a very, I don't know, for me it's a very scary thought, because we had Jack with women in Master and Commander, but I thought back, there were no women, involved with Stephen Maturin. And then it occurred to me that I believe at the very beginning of Master and Commander, as Stephen is waking up from a dream on that first glorious morning when all the main, protagonists of the first book are coming together, Dylan and Aubrey and Maturin, and O'Brien does such a nice job of having, what happened that morning as they each woke up. Maturin's coming out of this dream of this girl that he obviously loved that apparently broke his heart. And, you get that reference, but it's so quick. And then we go sort of the rest of the book. And here we have, there's that, I don't know if you wanted to share it, Stephen, that I thought was incredibly funny, an interesting scene between Diana Villers and Stephen Maturin, kind of, their first interchange together after having met, I guess, the day before.
Oh, so he's teasing her about being late, and she says that's the one advantage in being a woman. You do know that I'm a woman, don't you, Maturin? And then he goes on, is that the one?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and I think he's allowed to play his kind of, the banter comes with a little hint of his physician's kind of scientific detachment, and he can say, why should the trifling accident of sex induce a sentient being, let alone a smart one like you, to waste this beautiful morning, and I can't conceive why. Help me, let me get you help. Come, let me help you get up on the horse. And he keeps using this word sex under his breath over again. And she's horrified because she knows that he means it one way, but that the social bourgeoisie around them in the English countryside aren't going to pick it up quite like that. And she says, hush, Maturin, don't use words like that around here. It was bad enough yesterday. And he says, what do you mean yesterday? Oh, that's right. I'm not the first man to say that wit is the unexpected copulation of ideas. Far from it. It's a commonplace. And Diana says, yes, but as far as my aunt is concerned, you are the first man who's ever used that expression in public. So I think they're enjoying each other's company, right? They're both being slightly dishonest with each other. Maybe Maturin's, like some of us does, is using humor to defend the part of his character that was, as you say, harmed by that first relationship. And maybe she wants to play the part of being a kind of independent and lively and courageous woman, but she's perhaps not so lively and not so courageous.
We're going to take a short break, so if you would just stand off and on the coastline there, we'll be right back. Welcome back to The Lover's Hole, a Patrick O'Brien podcast.
I want to just talk about how Diana seems equipped to put men down as well. She's got this great skill, sometimes in a positive and funny way, but also sometimes in quite a damaging way, to take command of a situation. And by the way, this gives me the chance to mention what is, I think, a world-class fart joke. Congratulations to Patrick O'Brien. Yeah, Diana's being taken back from her cousin's house to go to the ball at Melbury Lodge, and the midshipman Babington is a bit anxious and his driving's a bit wild, so she calms him down, and to kind of put him in his place, she takes advantage of the moment when this bean-fed horse emits a thunderous long fart, and Babington says, "I beg your pardon," into the silence. And she says, "Oh, that's all right. I thought it was the horse." Which is like, that's a Christmas dad joke, right? But it's kind of played by Patrick O'Brien into the mouth of Diana, and she's using it absolutely as a put down to say, "Don't worry, young man, I've got this. You sit down over there and worry about the farting horse."
Yeah, and this ball that they're headed to, it comes off really well. It's funny. I think earlier, when it was given to the Williams household on best authority that there was no women at all in the household with Aubrey and Maturin, that it was all men and sailors. And Mrs. Williams saying, well, I should like to take my white glove over there. I can't imagine it. But they go to the ball. Everything is clean. Everything is ship shape, of course. And it's a great success. They've got all these other naval friends that are in who've kind of landed on shore after the war close by. But it hurt me a bit because in the midst of that, Stephen suffers, one of Diana's crushing blows as she kind of lists off the hopes that she has for her attributes of an ideal man. Stephen seems to be kind of engaging her in conversation. She's certainly engaged Stephen in a lot of conversation, and he kind of saying, what's the beast that you're stalking? And all of them, are not at all Stephen Maturin, and I think he scores that up quite quickly. And it's interesting. We get more of Diana's backstory. She's widowed, has had a bit of a tough time to it. She's kind of left here, stuck with her cousins and her aunt. But she just humiliates Stephen and seems to think nothing of it. And he seems to have very little at his disposal to protect himself from the heartbreak. He says, I'm adverse to giving pain, Villers, which you are not. And it's kind of a little, wow, perhaps shape of things to come here.
Yeah, absolutely. And shape of her character. It's clever how O'Brien set us up to see her as, sort of an engaging and sympathetic character. If you're looking for a strong, independent female character who has, kind of has her own mind, then she's absolutely it. And I remember reading that thinking, yeah, this is kind of a late 20th century woman deposited in a way in the characters of a 19th century story. Mm-hmm. But she's not just kind of, independence and courage and wit. She knows she has the ability to wound, and I don't know whether she can't stop herself or whether it's just part of the way that she kind of goes on her way through the world. But she's finds it so easy just to kind of inflict these great wounds on Stephen, and I guess we're going to see on other people as well.
Yeah. Well, and, we've now been on land for a good while, and it seems to often be Patrick O'Brien's style to say things go well at sea and they get a little bit dicey on land. Is that holding up in this book as well, Ian?
Yeah, I think so. It's funny, I noticed as well, not only do things go badly on land, things go badly at parties on land, right? We know that at sea, right? O'Brien loves a meal and he loves to list off the menu and he loves to kind of talk about the songs that they sing and the jokes that they tell. But when they're ashore, parties seem to be kind of stricken by this slightly uptight, slightly sarcastic, slightly passive-aggressive kind of competition between people to kind of flaunt their opinions in the case of kind of, small-minded bourgeois people who express opinions about, slavery or poverty or whatever. And then the willingness of our heroes, and particularly Stephen Maturin, to kind of try and put these people down by sabotaging them. There's all this kind of ill-concealed hostility and kind of competitiveness at dinner parties. And I don't know. I don't think that happens at many of my dinner parties. I don't know about yours, Mike.
I think if it happened quite as often as it does here, I'd stop going to them.
Right. But yeah, absolutely.
Although it is interesting that sometimes, and Stephen and Jack together do this so well that I think the people who are being had don't even realize it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Yes, I'm sure. There's the time, isn't there, when at the ball, Stephen is talking away. No, it's at Queenie's party in London. Stephen's talking away to Mrs. Williams, Sophie's mother, and she's just discovered that he's a landowner in Spain. And this is kind of a big deal. And she's kind of, oh, I didn't realize you were a man of property. And tell me about rack rent. Tell me about your tenant role. And he kind of plays her right along and says, oh yeah, the rack. Yeah, we have the rack. We use it for extracting rent from tenants, and we find that the more we torture them, the more they pay. Right. And she's nodding along, going, "Oh yes, very, very sensible way of getting control of your tenants."
No,
I think it's Patrick O'Brien having fun through the character of Stephen, right?
Yeah. In there's a scene where some friends of Molly Hart and Captain Hart would like to have their son become a midshipman on Jack's ship. Sorry. Right. Oh, what a oops. On ship, not a boat. It's a ship. and they're talking about, there's also, I guess this is back in Master and Commander, but they're talking about how important discipline, and how do they find that, and you know they ask Stephen about being a physician at sea, and he says, well, I find that the oil of cat answers, that they would tie them to the cat and whip them, and they'll get over their maladies. And Jack said, oh yes, he's a very firm discipliner. And the fact of the matter is they're nothing at all like this, but everybody at the party is just saying, yes, yes, yes. We love discipline.
Oh, dear me. And that's the great argument that Stephen and Jack are going to have all the way through their careers. How far do you go with discipline, and what damaging effect does it have if somebody takes authority?
Yeah, and it's interesting because they are so much, both of them. Stephen certainly much further, but even Jack himself, of a mind that seems contrary to the times, that says, Jack believes in a happy ship, a disciplined ship, but a happy ship, and not, an extremely harsh and punishing ship, which we see play in this book as well.
So I want to pick up the fact that we get a couple of turns for the worse, and I think there's a sort of general turn for the worse, and then a series of personal turns for the worse that really ratchet up the tension here.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning that that Sophie captured the Cacafuego at the end of the previous book, and Jack and Stephen are in funds, and they got all this prize money coming in, and Jack gets the really unexpected news that his prize agent has defrauded him of all this money. The prize agent has absconded with all of this cash, and the Cacafuego that Jack believed he had captured as a lawful prize, that judgment's been overturned in court. He actually has to hand back to the state the £11,000 that his prize agent had taken on his behalf, but the prize agent's gone. So the state needs its £11,000 back, and the prize agent's away in the hills. So he's left potentially, £11,000 in debt and penniless, and life pivots from Fiddler's Green, as he would say, happy days on shore, to real uncertainty again. And it's amazing how he just in this very matter-of-fact way, the whole story turns in an instant, and all of a sudden Stephen and Jack have got to up sticks. They've got to abandon the social life that they got with the Williams girls and with Diana Villiers, and they've got to abandon Melbury Lodge, and they've got to abandon the horses and the parties, and they've got to get out of there.
Yeah, it really is sad. And to watch this kind of perhaps a little bit more in that Jane Austen fashion, that, he goes from the plum to completely undesirable, knew he was undesirable, the way he holds his mouth, he's just completely sold out by Mrs. Williams and by some of society at the same time. He was Lucky Jack Aubrey, the talk of the Navy, talk of the neighborhood. And now, Stephen, it was fascinating, warns him, says, all right, Jack, don't say a word of this to anyone, I beg you. And Jack, who Stephen says, really just doesn't understand about women, didn't have a sister, mother died when he was young, just confides this to Sophie. And from there, boom, Mrs. Williams kind of uses her conniving means to get this out of Sophie. And Jack is just, he's not only on his lee shore with the news, but certainly on his lee shore as this news gets spread widely.
Now, I think there's one crumb of comfort from this financial disaster, which is that is then going to take them away from being near Diana Villiers. And I think we were already seeing signs that besides Stephen having this kind of on-again, off-again relationship with Diana Villiers, Jack's romantic eye has not entirely settled on Sophie, and he still has quite a fancy for Diana Villiers, and that was beginning to get in the way. I found it really sad when you can kind of see the small-scale ways in which they're starting to lie to each other or be a bit evasive about their connections with Diana Villiers. But having to flee the country in debt at least puts them both back into action. And, Stephen Maturin is clearly willing to step back into being a really supportive and close and loyal friend when he sees his friend Jack sent so low by this bad news about the prize money.
But really, Stephen has kind of looked at this irreconcilable triangle between he and Jack and Diana. And I think Stephen, thinks about taking himself out of the picture just to say, okay, I'm going to just leave the field. And seeing, though, that Jack is in trouble, he jumps in to save the day once again, as Stephen has a tendency to do. And I love him for it.
So we have a bit of a change of scene as they've had to flee the country in debt. Good news is Stephen has property in Spain, in Catalonia, so they're on the way via the south of France to go visit Spain, still in peacetime, as we are for the moment. And first of all, I really enjoyed the fact that they meet back up with Captain Christy Pallier. They kind of call in on this captain who captured them but treated them so well, and they're having this really enjoyable French meal, and we have a little bit of kind of funny French dialogue. But even this meal, like again, one of O'Brien's favorite set pieces, is upended by the news that war has been declared. And the Peace of Amiens is the following day is going to break down. War is going to break out between England and France. And once again, Stephen and Jack have to flee, this time fleeing from potential imprisonment as prisoners of war.
Yeah, and it's funny, without trying to do any spoilers here, I think we're learning a lot more about Stephen, so much more about, first of all, going to his property in Spain, that he's a property gentleman, and this whole idea about how we find out that war is in the offing, what Stephen's doing. It always seems like Jack's kind of leading the way, but we're seeing more and more that Stephen knows a lot about what's going on, sometimes more than Jack, and has his own. I don't even know how to get into it here. That one of the things as Jack first sees Christy Pellier, I think Stephen is not with him, and Christy Pellier reports this description of a spy who's been overlooking their harbor and ships and stuff like that, and Jack thinks it's just hilarious that this description matches Stephen. He says, "Oh no, that's Stephen looking at birds. You've got to be kidding me." So
and he's able to do it so sincerely that the French people are going, yeah, okay, yeah, that sounds plausible. He's just a naturalist. Okay,
absolutely. And one of the things I also loved with Christy Pellier and Jack is how much they enjoy each other's company, and how honorable and kind and friendly they are. Christy Pellier said, loved having you as my prisoner, because when I was, an English prisoner, I was treated so well, and I wanted to return the courtesy. And he has cousins in Bath, and Jack has been to visit the cousins, and as you kind of look at today's partisanship and what's going on all around the world, and you say, oh my gosh, here are two guys who were at war, who are about to be at war, and are having candid conversations about their allegiances, their likes and dislikes, about their respective governments and stuff like that, but have so much that they appreciate and admire in one another. And I thought, wow, this is heartwarming at any time, and certainly I feel completely true to that time, and we could use a little bit more of it today.
Yeah, I think we could. And I love as well the fact that he's making quite a nuanced point about the difference between loyalty to a culture or to a sort of a national identity versus loyalty to a regime. And Maturin's going to say this many, many times in later books, that he loves the French people. He counts himself as part French. He can pass for a Frenchman in the way that he speaks. He thinks Paris is the greatest city in the world, but he can't abide the way that the French state under Bonaparte goes about its business. And that's what he has an issue with. And that's his motivation to play his part in the conflict. And
yeah, well put.
Right. So to carry on talking about their escapades, now that they've moved on from dinner with Christy Pellier and they're potentially under threat of pursuit and imprisonment again, they're passing along southern France. And I've no idea where O'Brien got the idea from, presumably from a source, because that's where he got so many of his great ideas. Aubrey is dressed in a bear skin and somehow manages to convince the world that the bear is a bear, and Stephen is the bear keeper, kind of traveling from circus to circus and from marketplace to marketplace, gathering groats from people in return for seeing the bear dance. And the idea of an English naval captain in a bear skin dancing is comic gold, and he plays it really, really well. And there's a really stupid gendarme who insists on seeing the bear dance because, of course, why would a led bear not be dancing? Oh, okay. He even accepts the excuse that there's a lady's malady that stops this particular female bear from performing very many steps at this particular moment. He goes, yeah, okay, well, fair enough. So let me see. And Jack dances a few steps of a hornpipe, and everybody's happy with the idea that this bear is really a bear. And, we must be in the backwater of people who've never seen a bear before and are relatively uneducated. And Stephen and Jack are able somehow to bluff their way through in this bear costume.
Well, and to me on the reread, I had completely forgotten about this. And, I think
Really?
it just blew me away because I thought, I mean, O'Brien has this great way of viewing it from other people's point of view and these, wildly unique points of view. And all of a sudden we have this guy and his bear, and we go a long way before we find out who the guy and his bear are. And I'm scratching my head going, where is this going? And this is when you get to be a certain age, you get to reread books over and over again and be completely surprised by them. But it's just so incredibly well done. And then it's like, oh my gosh, it's Jack and Stephen. So not only, to your point, did Jack and Stephen somehow pull it off, but Patrick O'Brien, in my mind, pulled it off quite well as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And he also uses the device of the bear. Maybe part of you in the back of your mind is thinking, yeah, geez, summer in southwestern France in a bearskin, that's going to be uncomfortable. But actually, we realize that bearskin is a torture for Jack. He has to spend all day in this revolting, smelly, parasite-infested, filthy, greasy bear costume, and he can't get out of it. And he's got to travel through, weather and up hills and streams. And Stephen's looking after him really sort of tenderly. And the bear costume in another context is just like this thing that tortures Jack and makes his final journey into the freedom of Spain just so agonizing and so slow, and every step is pain for him.
Yes, Stephen counseled him in Master and Commander not to run too fast on the beach in a cutting out expedition because of men of his size, and he's just losing incredible amounts of weight, journeying hundreds of miles up mountainsides, and true Patrick O'Brien way, the impact on Jack. We don't learn for some time. It continues to get peeled away like an onion in different points of view in different conversations to what actually happens as Stephen has whisked Jack away from all the creditors of England and through war-torn now Spain and into the relative safety of Catalonia with Stephen.
And for Stephen, this is home. We don't ever see or hear very much of him relating to the people in the area. Yes. We don't hear of any of no members of his household. But clearly, this is a journey to safety for Stephen. But for Jack, this is like he's never been to Spain before. He's never been through a forest on the Franco-Spanish border before. He's certainly never been in a bear costume before. So he's placing a lot of himself in the hands of his friend Stephen.
Absolutely. And he's seeing Stephen, through new eyes, literally through the bear costume, through the, through the collar around the neck of the bear costume. But he's also seeing him in new eyes to say, wait a minute, Stephen's got this all under control. Stephen is planning this out. Stephen is being really ingenious in the way he's getting them through and how he's gathering intelligence about what to do and the way Stephen can make sense of whether it's safe or not safe and why they can or can't do certain things. I think Jack's, who has already had phenomenal esteem for Stephen, that esteem has risen even higher, and he really sees him in new ways in addition to the great ways that he's seen him in the past.
Anyway, so I think this is a key moment. This is an end of the first act. We've got Jack and Stephen really mired in complex relationships with women and also with their friendship on an uneven keel. We've got Jack, his career's on the rocks. Is he going to go a really undesirable kind of low-rated ship from the Admiralty just for the sake of getting to sea to avoid his debtors? What's really going on with Maturin, and what are these other background interests that he's going to pursue? I think there's a lot for us still to talk about in Post-Captain, and I think maybe that's where we'll pick it up next time. What do you say?
Oh, I think it's a great idea. And there's a whole war in front of us. And what part is Jack going to play in? Because we haven't gotten that. This book is broken out with peace. Oh my gosh. How can we have a historical naval fiction broken out in peace?
Absolutely. So We're going to pick this up in episode 4. We really hope that you've enjoyed episode 3. If you're enjoying this podcast, please subscribe, review us. We're on iTunes. Share, tell your friends. Get in touch with us as well. We've got the Facebook page, facebook.com/lubbershole. Ask questions. Tell us what you want to hear us talking about as we meander through the rest of Post Captain and as we move on into the rest of the Aubrey Maturin canon.
And while you're giving us that feedback, which we greatly appreciate, we're thinking about inviting guests on the show. We'd love to know, who would you like to hear as a guest on this podcast? If you're listening to this and you have something to say, you've got a perspective to bring here, would you like to join us as a guest? Please let us know.
We're not proud. We'll make space.
14 inches of hammock space, all we need for every guest.
And a tot of rum.
And a tot of
Mike,
rum.
I think that's our show. What do you say to next time? Maybe a little bit more Patrick O'Brien.
With all my heart. That was fun.